Hi, my name is Alyssa Smith,
And I'm Mariah Sherman.
and we are going to talk about the motor development of hula hooping. So the infantile reflexes that we consider to be the most important for sufficient hula hooping in adulthood included the stepping reflex, symmetrical tonic neck, the crawling reflex, labyrinthine righting, derotative righting, and parachute, making sure to note that we're tilting the baby in all directions. So here is an example of the three most important reflexes that we consider for kids to go through in order to be sufficient at hula hooping. The first one is labyrinthine righting, making sure that the head is staying with the horizon. The next one is the stepping reflex, by lifting the baby up, and if their feet is against a flat surface, they'll go in a stepping motion, and then the parachute reflex. Some infantile constraints that go with hula hooping. For individual, a functional constraint includes motivation, attention span, and mental capacity for motor planning and development. At this point, as you see to the right, the baby is probably just going to put the hula hoop in their mouth and not do much else. A structural constraint includes the size, their muscle development and strength, and their brain development and size as well. They can't even probably hold their head up, so they're probably not going to be able to do much in terms of actually being able to hula hoop. An environmental constraint includes the size of an area to move, how much tummy time they're getting, and access to caretakers to assess proper development, as well as lots of access to toys and play. The more time they're able to develop gross motor skills and be able to move around, the better they're probably going to be able to develop the skills later on in adolescence and adulthood. And at this point, any task constraints include the size of the hula hoop that you might be giving the baby, as well as any body parts that they're trying to use to hula hoop, but again, this is probably just going to be focused on their hands and mouth. In childhood, the coordination can be different. Circumduction is incredibly necessary. At this point, those kids might not know how to actually coordinate their movements. There's lots of lateral and front and backward foot movement, as well as balance strategies, including the ankle, knee, and hip, in order to maintain proper posture while they're doing it. For their coordination, they have to be able to stand upright on 2 feet and shift their weight from their hips from one foot to another, as well as using tactile localization to feel where the hula hoop is and move their hips and body accordingly. Usually this is in the anterior and posterior iliac spine. They must be able to eventually keep their head upright and their arms not completely in high guard as the movement progresses, and this usually comes with practice. Their body angle is constantly changing at the angle of the hips, with their knees bent slightly, but usually not more than 20 degrees, and their ankles are usually dorsiflexed slightly on the ground to allow for hip and knee movement. There's lateral flexion and extension, but in early childhood, all of these angles might be minimal, and there's lots of extra torque and force that's not necessarily coordinated to keep the hula hoop going around. Their posture tends to be upright. Their heads should not be tilted. Their hips can tilt forward and back, as well as the spine being laterally flexed and extended. But usually these movements aren't exaggerated, and they tend to remain upright and not really know how to put all these movements together. But the body isn't necessarily stiff. Instead, it's a little bit more loosey-goosey. Some childhood constraints include their attention span, ability to listen to instructions, internal motivation to be successful, as well as improve their skills. At this point, if your friends aren't really doing it, you might not necessarily be doing it either, and it's how much access you might have to it during recess. A structural constraint still includes the size, musculoskeletal development, the coordination of the hips, knees, and ankles, and this just comes from the fact that the kids are still growing at a very rapid rate. Some might be small, some might be larger, and because of that, they might not necessarily know how to coordinate their body, especially if their body has any awkward growth spurts. Some environmental constraints include how much time they're spent practicing inside versus outside, as well as how much time is given by their parents for exploration and practice. If their parents aren't giving them access to hula hoops or they don't have access to hula hoops at school, they're probably not going to increase their skills. There's lots of whether or not they have access to information on skill improvement, as well as peer access for play. If their peers aren't going to be doing it, they're not going to be doing it either. Some task constraints are moving up to how much time is allotted to hula hoop. Usually this is recess time, what the size of the hula hoop is, as well as its weight. And then if there are any rules or games now, since the kids have probably progressed from just basic hula hooping to any games that might be involved with it. So body scaling is incredibly important when it comes to hula hooping. As you can see on the right with Mariah holding, if you were to go to Walmart, you can see a vast array of different size hula hoops. And this is for different size kids as well as different weights for hula hoops. And just some simple physics behind hula hooping. The heavier the hula hoop you have, the more it takes for the body to have to project force to get the hula hoop around their body. So the heavier it is, the slower it's going to go around, and it's actually easier to coordinate. If you've ever had a super light hula hoop, you might have to move your hips a lot faster than if you were to have a super heavy hula hoop that has more friction. It's the force of torque that keeps the hula hoop going around, and the more force that you use with your hips, the faster it's going to go around your body. So more exaggerated movements with a larger hoop or a heavier hoop is necessary, but this might be easier for people to coordinate because it's moving slower. And a smaller scaled hula hoop is usually for a younger kid, which allows for more coordination because of their smaller body. And again, the more sand you have within the hoop, the more friction you're going to have and the more torque you're going to have.